Kings, Saima and Shadil are here. So today we are reading the diary of Anne Frank that we have been reading for a few days. And we are going to read from Wednesday, September 1942. Dearest Kitty, Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan have had a terrible argument. I've never seen anything like it. So now she has started describing incidents which are happening while she's in the
hiding place.
yes, hiding. So she is saying that my mother and father would never shout at each other like that. The argument was based on something so trivial. Shadil, what does trivial mean?
I don't know.
Something very small, petty. It didn't seem worth wasting a single word on it. Oh well, to each his own. Of course, it's very difficult for Peter, who gets caught in the middle, but no one takes Peter seriously anymore since he's hypersensitive and lazy. Yesterday he was beside himself with worry because his tongue was blue instead of pink. This rare phenomenon disappeared as quickly as it came. Today he's walking around with a thick scarf on because he's got a stiff neck. His Highness has been complaining of lumbago. What's lumbago too?
You can ask.
What's
lumbago?
Let's check it up. Do you have a dictionary here? Yeah? Let's do it from here. Type it in here.
What?
L U M B A G O and press enter. Press enter. Okay, what is it? How do you pronounce it?
Lumbago.
Lumbago. So it is pain in the muscles and joints of the lower back. Okay? So Peter got this ache. Aches and pains in his heart, kidneys, and lungs are also par for the course. He is an absolute hypochondriac. That's the right word, isn't it? Hypochondriac is somebody who is having pain all over in his body and he's experiencing that due to some psychological condition. How do you define psychology, by the way?
Psychology is a scientific study of our mind and behavior.
Excellent. So, you know what psychology is. Mother and Mrs. Van Daan aren't getting along very well. There are enough reasons for the friction. So, what happens in friction?
What?
Friction. Do you know what is friction?
No.
Friction means that when two things rub, friction is created. Okay? So, here she is using this word that they are not getting along well, they are fighting. So, you and Shifa Baji, for example, often experience friction, don't you? You disagree on so many things. To give you one small example, Mrs. Van D has removed
Isn't
all.
Vanden?
Yes, she's written. She has abbreviated the name to D. Has removed all but 3 of her sheets from our communal linen cupboard. She's assuming that. I don't know. This word has. It's a little bit rubbed out word. Erased word.
Where?
This one is been used for both families.
It starts with M-O.
Yeah. She'll be in for a nasty surprise when she discovers that mother has followed her lead. Furthermore, Mrs. Vandy is miffed because we're using her china instead of ours. She's still trying to find out what we've done with our plates. They're a lot closer than she thinks. Since they are packed in cardboard boxes in the attic behind a load of Opacta advertising material, as long as we're in hiding, the plates will remain out of her reach. Since I'm always having accidents, it's just as well. Yesterday I broke one of Mrs. Vandy's soup bowls. Oh, she angrily exclaimed. Can't you be more careful? That was my last one. Please bear in mind, Kitty, that the two ladies speak abominable Dutch. I don't dare comment on the gentlemen. They'll be highly insulted. If you were to hear their bungled attempts You'd laugh your head off. We've given up pointing out their errors since correcting them doesn't help anyway. Whenever I quote Mother or Mrs. Van Daan, I write proper Dutch instead of trying to duplicate their speech. So they are not writing or speaking Dutch correctly. So they speak Dutch in Germany.
What is Dutch?
It's language, just like English is a language and Urdu is a language.
See it on.
Last week, there was a brief interruption in our monotonous routine. This was provided by Peter and a book about women. I should explain that Margot and Peter are allowed to read nearly all the books Mr. Kleinman lends us, but the adults prefer to keep this special book to themselves. This immediately piqued Peter's curiosity. What forbidden fruit did it contain? He sneaked off with it when his mother was downstairs talking and took himself and his booty to the loft. For 2 days all was well. Mrs. Van Daan knew what he was up to, but kept mum until Mr. Van Daan found out about it. He threw a fit, took the book away, and assumed that would be the end of the business. However, he'd neglected to take the son's curiosity into account. Peter, not in the least fazed by his father's swift action, began thinking up ways to read the rest of this vastly interesting book. So they are discussing a book that that seems to be mysterious and that seems to be interesting and that evokes curiosity. In the meantime, Mrs. Vandy asked Mother for her opinion. Mother didn't think this particular book was too suitable for Margot, but she saw no harm in letting her read most other books. You see, Mrs. Van Daan, Mother said, there's a big difference between Margot and Peter. To begin with, Margot's a girl, and girls are always mature than boys. Second, she's already read many serious books and doesn't go looking for those which are no longer forbidden. Third, Margot's much more sensible and intellectually advanced as a result of her 4 years at an excellent school. Mrs. Van Daan agreed with her, but felt it was wrong as a matter of principle to let youngsters read books written for adults. Have you ever encountered such a situation where there are certain books for adults and you're not allowed to read them? Or not yet?
Not yet.
Meanwhile, Peter had thought of a suitable time when no one would be interested in either him or the book. At 7:30 in the evening, when the entire family was listening to the wireless in the private office, he took his treasure and stole off to the loft again. He should have been back by 8:30, but he was so engrossed in the book that he forgot the time and was just coming downstairs when his father entered the room. The scene that followed was not surprising. After a slap, a whack, and a tug of war, the book lay on the table and the Peter was in the loft. So he got a good beating from his father, didn't he? This is how matters stood when it was time for the family to eat. Peter stayed upstairs. No one gave him a moment's thought. He'd have to go to bed without his dinner. We continued eating, chatting merrily away, when suddenly we heard a piercing whistle. We laid down our forks and stared at each other, the shock clearly visible on our pale faces. Oh, they heard some whistle. Do you think it is something that is to be worried about? It might
Something
be
scary.
maybe the police is there after them because they are in a hiding. Don't you think so?
What had happened?
So that's what I'm going to read. What happened then?
No,
Then
before
we
what
heard-
happened? That
It was a whistle outside. Then we heard Peter's voice through the chimney. I won't come down. Mr. Van Daan leapt up, his napkin falling to the floor, and shouted with the blood rushing to his face. I've had enough. Father, afraid of what might happen, grabbed him by the arm, and the two men went to the attic. After much struggling and kicking, Peter ended up in his room with the door shut, and we went on eating. So Peter was very angry, and his father was also very angry. Mrs. Van Daan wanted to save a piece of bread for her darling son, but Mr. Vandy was adamant. What does adamant mean?
I don't know.
He was reluctant. He wasn't willing to do something.
Let's see.
So Mrs. Van Daan wanted to save a piece of bread for her darling son. If he doesn't apologize this minute, he'll have to sleep in the loft. So her dad was saying that he must apologize for his behavior. He won't get the food otherwise. We protested that going without dinner was enough punishment. What if Peter were to catch cold? We won't be able to call a doctor. Peter didn't apologize and returned to the loft. Mr. Van Daan decided to leave well enough alone, though he did note next morning that Peter's bed had been slept in. At 7, Peter went to the attic again, but was persuaded to come downstairs when father spoke a few friendly words to him. After 3 days of sullen looks and stubborn silence, everything was back to normal. So, what was happening in the story there? People were quarreling and fighting, and children getting beatings, and they were not talking. And Anne was witnessing all these things in her hiding, in their hiding. So, what was happening? What does sullen mean? Serious looks and stubborn silence. What does stubborn mean? Often you are stubborn. No, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. Aren't you stubborn? No, I don't want to study. I don't want to read. I won't say sorry to Baji. Stubborn.
Because I don't like that.
No, this is not the reason. You're stubborn sometimes. So there was stubborn silence, and then after a few days, everything was back to normal. So, what did you enjoy about this book today?
I enjoyed when there was a whistle
Ah,
because it was something like strange, something
mysterious.
mysterious.
Thank you. From Saima and Shadil. Bye bye for today.